Hello world, this is Shruti Pandey, and today I have with me somebody so phenomenal, so amazing, who is praised by the who's who of writing and authors from Ariana Huffington to, clients from JP Morgan Chase to Government of Canada. When you have somebody like that on your podcast, that somebody is Zach Mercurio, who is a PhD, author, researcher. But the most amazing thing that I love about him, which is why I wanted him on my podcast for so long, is he specializes in things which are absolutely the ones which I love the most. And I'm going to read out all of those adjectives because all of those adjectives are literally my bucket list, which are purposeful leadership, meaningful work, positive organizational psychology. And if this wasn't enough, his book is number one New York bestseller, which is called as The Invisible Leader. So, Zach, thank you for giving me this amazing Thanksgiving gift and bringing Christmas early for Mumbai, India. And thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
I'm excited too. And before I get to, your journey and stuff, do you want to say a few words or shall I just shoot my three questions that I have for you?
Why don't you start with your questions? I'm excited.
Awesome, awesome. So my first question for you is, your book is called The Invisible Leader. While I understand the leader part because it's the most used word in the corporate world, why do you say invisible? Because aren't leaders quite visible figures at work or personal lives? Why say invisible?
Mm. In 1928, there was a management scholar. She was a woman in the United States. Her name was Mary Parker Follett. And she said something very wise back in 1928. She said, leaders and followers are both following the invisible leader, the common purpose. Purpose, having a reason to continue on, having the will to continue on, having the motivation to contribute, to fulfill that reason to contribute, is the invisible leader. Our purpose is what guides our life. It's the ultimate guide of our lives and of our organizations. Every organism survives because it has a will to survive. Every organism that ceases to contribute to its ecosystem dies. And that's why that contribution to its ecosystem, that purpose, is the pulling force of life itself. It's the animating force of life. And when we think about organizations or we think about teams, purpose, the will to continue on, the reason for which we're here, our contribution to the ecosystem around us, our contribution to the community, to the people around us, that is the ultimate leader of an organization. And when a group of people have a common will to live, a common will to survive, I think people are unstoppable. So when I talk about the invisible leader, I'm talking about the common purpose. Great leaders tend to get out of the way of the purpose. They allow the higher purpose to take over and guide and harmonize people's behavior. They maintain that sense of purpose. They give people the evidence of their significance. They make sure people have a clear line of sight to that bigger reason, but they tend to get out of the way and let the purpose take over. I always say that, make sure your purpose, whether in your life or whether in your organization or on your team, make sure your purpose is the boss of your decision-making, is the ultimate boss. So that's why I call it the invisible leader.
You you have triggered many enzymes in my head right now, and it's really bursting with so many follow-up questions on this. And most importantly, you remind me of something very important, which is the we can call it the great leader or whatever, the greatest leader of all times. They somehow are the most, the invisible ones, or who never really got the limelight or never really took the limelight. And it suddenly makes sense that you used I love how you use the apt words always from, calling it positive organizational psychology, purposeful work, meaningful work, and stuff like that. And suddenly this invisible leader is making so much more sense. But when you say purpose, is it like a default thing where we just think, okay, I need to earn a livelihood, for instance, or maybe it could be just that all of us are working in this company. Let's just make this place earn a lot of money.
Mm.
What is that purpose when you mention purpose?
Yeah, so there's different kinds of purpose, right? But purpose is generally defined as the reason for which something exists, something's use or usefulness.
Okay.
And psychologists find that there are different kinds of purpose that have different benefits. And the kind of purpose that has all of the psychological benefits you read about, like on average, people who have this sense of purpose, they live longer, they're more resilient, they're 4 times more engaged in their work. It's the number one factor in job satisfaction. This purpose is when the purpose is directed, it has a goal, and it's useful to other people. So the crux of purpose is that it focuses us on contribution. So what I'm actually more interested in is not the big capital P purpose, the big life's purpose or a big organization's purpose. What's more important for an individual, for a team, for an organization is to be purposeful. And being purposeful is contribution-centered thinking, being, and doing. It's the difference between getting up at the start of the day and looking at your phone and saying, what do I have to do today? And getting up and saying, how is what I'm going to do today going to impact other people? Now, I'm going to throw another wrench into what you said. You mentioned that, is going to work and earning a paycheck a purpose? Certainly, providing for a family, providing for other people is a purpose. It's also probably not why the job exists. So, for example, no job was ever created to pay somebody. Every job exists to fill a human need, solve some problem, contribute in some way. In fact, like in the US, 60% of our jobs are in service-based jobs. So frontline service. These are the things from trash collectors to janitors to food service workers to hospitality workers, people who literally keep society running. So while there are plenty of like BS jobs, as some sociologists call them, I think most jobs actually do exist to solve some problem, contribute in some way, whether it's to a team member, whether it's to a small project, whether it's to something that produces something else. The result is that you get a paycheck, but that's usually not why the job exists. So I'll put that wrench in there as well. And then I'll put another wrench in there, which is that the meaning of work in your life might be to get a paycheck, but the meaning in work is what you experience when you're there. And the meaning in work, having that purposeful perspective in your job, because you spend upwards of a third of your life there, is what we know is at the crux of human well-being and societal well-being. You cannot have meaningless work and a healthy society.
Absolutely. Oh gosh. You have reminded me of meaning too much, and I really need to dive onto the second thing that I have for you. I mean, I can just keep going on the first question, this one. There's so much to ask really on this one, but because meaning is hard hitting me right now. And to give you an example, a personal example, my example, uh, when people call things spiritual and like you mentioned, meaning in work, uh, be it as a student, be it as a professional, I've always given my entire self, my entire focus, concentration, whatever you may call it, so how people need to go to a temple, church, or synagogue to get their spirituality on, I just have to be at work, do my work, and I'm in that zone where I don't care if the oxygen is there, the world exists, and that is really the meaning in my work. And I'm pretty sure there are a couple more people like me out there who maybe they don't really know yet, but have found their meaning in work. My catch here is I don't ask straight questions. My catch here is for people like me who know their meaning and purpose of work. how to keep my meaning and purpose in work if I have a horrible boss or a management which is,
Mm,
I don't want to put adjectives there, but I know my meaning and purpose, and I just don't
yeah.
have a good boss or a horrible management. So how do I go about it?
Yeah. So let me add another layer of complexity to this.
Okay,
And
let's
the
do
layer
it.
of complexity is that I think there's something actually destructive about the religiosity of work, making work the sole source of meaning in one's life. When you're, I believe that people should be able to experience meaningfulness when they're at work, when they're in their job. I don't believe that people should derive their sole source of meaningfulness in their life from their jobs
Yeah.
or from any place. I mean, it's unhealthy to
Yes.
derive it in any place, because the problem is when you hinge your identity on one thing, when that thing goes, so too goes your sense of self.
Yeah.
That's why in the Great Resignation here in the US, you saw so many people scramble and lose their sense of identity, which plunged a lot of people into asking big existential questions because they put their whole identity in what they did and how they did it. And when that was gone, what was left?
Yeah.
Nothing, right? And allowed people to start thinking about, who am I? Why am I? So that's the first thing. Work, because it takes up so much of our lives,
Okay.
is a key source of meaning. You can't avoid that. The people who may be listening right now and saying, well, I just work for a paycheck. No, you don't. You spend a third of your life in a place. Inevitably, how you make meaning in that place where you spend a dominant part of your life affects how you make meaning in your life. You can't shape it. Well-being at work impacts well-being in life, period. We know that.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing I would caution: the religiosity of work, making work a religion,
Oh, I
because it can be
agree. I
very, very
agree.
difficult.
Yeah.
But the second thing is, if you have a horrible boss, as you said, and this is really important, that you shouldn't be alone in experiencing meaningfulness. Meaning is made and crafted. It is not just simply up to the individual to find. And that's why one of the things I think is so important is that every boss, every leader, everybody in community has the skill set to make sure everybody feels like they matter. Because meaningfulness is the experience of something as positive, as purposeful, and of significant. Meaningfulness is when you think of something as positive, purposeful, and significant.
Yeah.
When we believe that we're significant, we have to see the evidence of our significance. To believe that we're significant, we have to see the evidence of our significance. That evidence of our significance comes from our community around us. So I don't think it's up to you to pull up your bootstraps and go to work every day and find meaning for yourselves. I also think that we need to re-educate your leaders
Yeah.
to create an environment that shows you the evidence of your significance, to make it easier for you to see your significance every day and to make sure that you're experiencing meaningfulness. Now, that said, there are some things that you can do to experience more meaningfulness. Focus on the relationships immediately around you and ask yourself, how can I use my strengths to improve that person in that next interaction? Or for people you might have responsibility over, how can I make sure that person feels noticed, seen, they feel affirmed, they feel needed? How can I show my boss, who's horrible, that they matter? Oftentimes we think that culture is prescriptive, it's top down.
Yeah.
Are you participating in creating the culture you say you want for your horrible leader? And I know that's difficult, but if you're wanting to craft a new culture, it's really about acting on the culture that you want. So those are a few things. One, be careful about the religiosity of work. And two, it's really important for others to create environments that maintain meaningfulness for people, not just the individual. And then three, you can craft your perceptions and your work as meaningful, even in the midst of a horrible boss.
Absolutely. I love this answer in all the totality of it, in all the three aspects that you gave, because, when I resigned in my penultimate job, I literally felt like it was a breakup. And I've
Mm,
never been in a relationship, so how did I even feel that it was like a breakup? I mean, that was the thing that haunted me the most. Like, why do I feel it
yeah.
this way? But that is exactly how everybody felt, and that is why they resigned. Otherwise nobody was going to just, because like I was telling you before the podcast, it felt like, why am I making it work? This is not a marriage. And
Right.
it's all about the meaning, right? I might be giving a lot of meaning at work, but if it's not meaning anything to me, because of
Yes.
the environment, because of the hostile people, etc., there can be so many reasons, right? There's so much complexity, like you rightly said. So that makes total sense to me. And the contribution for leaders, invisible or visible, makes the whole lot of difference. In fact, you reminded me of one particular incident where, very casually and very with good vibes, I once told a manager who was like the first time manager in his life, that was the first time he was being given that managerial position. And I very delicately and very positively and casually said, you know what, you're a good manager. And sometimes we don't realize the importance of our own words in somebody else's life, good or bad. I think it
Mm,
turned out great for him because he got that confidence that, okay, somebody sees me as a good manager. And
mm.
you're absolutely right, it's not just about my meaning, but how do I make others also feel about the meaning and purpose at work. And I want to understand from you, third and final thing, which is, since we've talked about leaders so much in the second question,
Can I add one thing?
please do. Please.
Sorry. I think you make a great point that a lot of the leaders who are horrible have unmet needs to matter. And feelings of invisibility often result in acts of desperation. People cling to power, people cling to performance, people cling to metrics, numbers, results when they don't feel like they are significant enough. And oftentimes, a leader in a position where their sole source of worth is dependent upon what they produce can often have unmet needs to matter, which manifest in misuse of power. And so we have to develop leaders better, starting in our educational systems, starting in frontline employees, developing managers to make sure that that primal human need to matter to someone else is met, because otherwise you get a lot of acts of desperation to be seen. Someone in an interview once told me that I'm screaming to be seen. And this was a high level leader.
Yeah, yeah, I understand what you're trying to say. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for putting my incident and my thought and my experience in such a beautiful manner. Only you, Zach, only you could have done this. Thank you so much. And I genuinely want to understand from you in this third question, because I think it's really like, flowing like a good narrative and story, our entire podcast really. My third question to you is, and I remember, like I gave you an example of the person who I complimented. I remember during this pandemic when everything is work from home, one of the newly promoted managers, one of my ex colleagues, he messaged me, and I remember very vividly, he told me, Shruti, why can't you ask somebody this question, how a first time manager should behave? Because, there is again a discrepancy. The people who want to be manager are sometimes not promoted. In fact, in those places, people just hire and blitz scale and do crazy stuff. And people who don't really care of becoming people manager and stuff, they would be given those. So it's like, I don't understand why this is a universal law that you have to always
Mm,
match needs and make people, not meet their needs, creating the whole problem. So, what is your message to a newly promoted manager or leader at an organization or company, irrespective if he or she wanted to be that or not?
mm. Every single result, financial or otherwise, is mediated through a human being. Think about what the ideal state of that human being should be. You'll probably think motivated, confident,
No.
feeling like they're welcome, feeling like they matter.
No,
So
I'll tell you honestly, hold on a second. When you said how they should feel, the one word that came to my head was happy.
happy. Yes.
That was it.
Right. They should feel happy, right? So if you're a new manager, don't forget that every single result that you or your superiors think about is mediated through a human being. Human beings are the leading indicators of everything else you want in the organization. Most leaders fail because they focus on lagging indicators. Profit is a lagging indicator. Results are a lagging indicator. Performance are a lagging indicator. The leading indicator of all those things is human well-being. Great leaders focus on the leading indicator. They cultivate, they measure, they take a pulse on human well-being. And what do I mean by human well-being? I mean that you invest in relationships, building high quality, trusting relationships. You invest in caring for people. You invest in making sure that people feel physically, emotionally, psychologically safe, right? The second is autonomy. You make sure that people have some say in what's happening, that they can share their voice, right? That they can give ideas about how they do their work. The third one is making sure they have opportunities to develop, making sure that they have opportunities to learn. And then the fourth, and actually the most important, we'll go back to the beginning of the podcast, is making sure they have purpose, making sure that they feel like they matter. Because when someone doesn't believe that they matter, it's easy for nothing to matter. People will not care about anything that you say until they feel cared for.
Yeah.
So my biggest advice for a new leader is to make sure you focus on the leading indicators of everything you say you want, which is human well-being, and become an expert in human well-being and creating that, and you will see the long-term results that you want. And your leaders and your supervisors and your managers and superiors will say, gosh, how did you do that? How did you create this team? And then
Yeah.
that's how we create change in organizations and rehumanize organizations.
Yes.
And it requires you being a long-term thinker, not chasing the short-term results, because it's quicker and easier to dehumanize people and make a lot of money.
Yes.
But to make a lot of money sustainably, to create performance sustainably over time, you have to focus on human well-being. You cannot have a healthy economy, a healthy business, a healthy organization with unhealthy human beings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You also made me realize, on circling back to the purpose point, that is it about the whole mattering part is which is the prime reason why people attach their identity to that one thing, because okay, I'm being cared at this place. It could be anything. It could be your partner, it could be your family, it could be your work, anything. But suddenly that one place that gives you that matter thing, you suddenly are like, that's my identity, that's my everything. Is
That
this
is,
all
yeah,
very
it's by
complicatedly
that,
interlinked?
yeah. The need to matter is biologically hardwired into every human being's brain. Think about the first thing you did, researchers find, when you were born is you tilted your head upward to look for someone to care for you. Your survival depended on whether you mattered to a human being, a caretaker. That need for attachment never goes away. It morphs through adulthood into the need for inclusion and belonging in relationships with other people.
Like you read my mind. Belonging is the word I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so when when we feel like we're seen, when we feel like we're affirmed, we feel like we're needed, and we feel like we're part of a group, it fulfills a basic primal survival instinct. And so, of course, yeah, we're going to want to stay there because it's safe. We're surviving, we're thriving. It's a place that is non-threatening. But I will say, when an organization or a workplace creates an environment of anti-mattering in the human brain, you're creating a threat to that person's survival. And what do people do when their survival is under threat? They scramble, they leave, they act out. Most organizational issues, most human motivation issues, most employee issues are really anti-mattering issues.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This makes perfect sense on psychology. And don't try to be modest, Zach. Don't try to be modest at all, because this feels like, do every PhD folks and do every doctorate folks talk as simple as you, where people can understand, people, common people like me, can understand what you're talking? Because I don't think so. And probably I'm being judgmental right now, but it's so great that you have this immense understanding of wisdom, which is centuries old, which people just overlook these days. And you're sharing it so amazingly with the world in a language, in a way which is digestible and not very jargony. I really appreciate you for that.
Thank you. And it is simple.
It is.
It's as simple as being hungry. When we're hungry, we eat. When we need to feel like we matter, we reach out, and we need mattering. When people call this stuff touchy-feely, it's like saying being hungry for lunch is touchy-feely. We have it's a survival instinct, the need to matter and to be attached to people. And so I think that I can speak simply about it because it is simple. It's very, very simple. And I think that one of the problems with it being so simple, and I talk about this all the time, is that we think it's just common sense. And what's common sense is
It's
usually
not
not common
common.
practice.
It's not common. Yeah, it is not common. And does this also come from your prior experiences of, having lived there and been there in that space of work and life, and which is why you can share this? It has to
Yeah.
come from a deeper place somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I was educated for success. I was educated to get a good job, get a good starting salary, and that was successful as long as I was making money.
Yeah.
The problem is that when you chase results, the problem by being motivated by a result or money is the fact that you can achieve it. And then what?
Yeah.
Right? It's a roller coaster. It's a path to perpetual unhappiness. It is. And the other component that I would talk about is that when I was in an advertising firm in my first job, and I was asked to go try to sell people advertising, I would meet with these people. I would have dinner with them, and they were real people living lives as vivid and complex and as important as mine. But then I would go back to my office and we'd have a sales meeting, and we'd talk about these people as just things. How can we get more money out of them? And there was such a disconnect, right, between the human being and how we were thinking about them. And I just realized how dehumanizing
Did it ever feel
organizations
like
can
you
be.
were exploiting anybody, any of the parties? Did it ever feel like at a
Yeah,
human exploiting?
anytime you see a human being as a means to your end, you're exploiting them.
Exactly.
That's a very difficult truth for leaders to understand. Anytime you think of your team member, you think of a customer or a client as a means to your self-serving end, making more money, you're exploiting them.
Yeah. Which is why I started hating the word employee.
Right. Or human resource.
Oh God, that's even worse. Yeah. Resource.
Or, the worst is when companies say our employees are our greatest asset
Our
when,
family?
yeah, our greatest asset when in the budget, they're listed as an expense.
Oh, the number part. Yeah.
Yeah, we treat machines in factories with more care than we treat employees because they're an asset.
Absolutely. And the biggest bluff of this century was when we started calling employees as, oh, you are our family. And which is
Yes, I
we
know.
started
Right.
letting
Right.
them go because,
Yeah.
oh, this is what we do to
Right.
family.
Right.
You can just show yourselves.
Right. Families don't have attendance policies where if you're late for a meeting to drop your kid off at school, that you get fired.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just about, ruining every possible human emotion, really. In my own experience, if I literally, in this particular conversation with you, my entire 11 years of corporate journey was going in my head, and
Yeah.
I was trying to,
Yeah.
focus on us rather than reliving in that area. And I hope I get a good night's sleep, because whatever invisible, visible person I was at my job, at least talking to you made me affirm that I always tried the best thing and I'd always try to do the right,
Yeah.
because I never wanted to be exploited. So I never exploited anyone.
Yeah. And I think that's where systemic change starts. It can feel really big, right? Like the system needs to change and the organization needs to change, but like organizations are individual human beings who organize. So the best way to change an organization is to start with individually enacting the culture you say you want relentlessly. You may end up leaving that organization, but don't give up your own dignity and how you want to treat other people for the organization. You know, Simon Sinek always says, be the leader you wish you had.
Yes.
And I think it's a great piece of advice when you're faced with a difficult leader, a difficult organization. Don't let that organization turn you into them.
No, never.
Don't let them take away that dignity. And I see that happening a lot, where middle leaders actually become the leaders they say they don't want.
Yeah. 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 That is way, way better. I mean, yes, people, if you're listening and you can connect to this, please don't be the bad guy you always hated and mocked and maybe said bad words behind.
Yeah.
Don't become that. It totally makes sense. And very quickly I want to, shoot some rapid questions at you, because
Okay.
I think we have done this too hard hitting for all of us, but all meaningful, really. It is also meaningful. So very quickly I want to understand, you were at advertising and you also were teaching at a
Yeah.
university, without
Uh-huh.
taking names of any of the places. So which was the most difficult part, advertising or teaching?
Mm. Advertising was difficult in one way because the structure and the industry norm was already there, right, to make as much money as possible. But what was also difficult in higher education, in especially coaching students on careers, is that the system was also working against them. So, for example, one of the things I like to use is this example that in architecture, you would never build a building before you understood why the building exists. Like it's like form follows function. Yet we were doing that with students' careers all the time. We'd ask them to create a resume, get their engineering degrees, create a career path before they understood why they were, their function. And inevitably, when you build anything, by building something without understanding someone's why, you get tension. And the educational system was so set up to try to get people to make money for companies. That was the like end outcome. If you really think about it, it's like a
Yes.
job factory,
Yes.
that it was really hard to get students to understand their purpose. And then they go back into a academic advising meeting, or they go back into a classroom and they're told, to be successful, you need to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that tension, that unresolved tension, was really hard to deal with. So they were both equally hard in different ways. And I think the lesson is that, to ask this question of everybody who's in any walk of life here is the system that you're participating in and helping to maintain and build designed to create the change you want? And if it's not, what can you do in your small sphere to start changing that system? Just within your very small sphere of influence.
And my second quick question is, which one of the jobs you enjoyed the most? I don't want the reasoning. I just want you to tell me, was advertising more enjoyable or was teaching more enjoyable for you?
Teaching. Yeah,
Nice.
teaching was. Yeah.
That is
I
what you're
love seeing that.
doing even now
Yeah.
for most of us.
Yeah. I love when someone has a new belief and you can see that light bulb moment, or when a concept speaks to someone's experience.
Amazing, amazing. I don't want to end this conversation at all. I would love to meet you in person, really. You are one of those people who I would actually feel like hanging out and meeting. And if you're ever in India, I would buy you lunch,
That
whatever.
would be great.
Really, really. But if you were to, if we have to wrap up this conversation, what would be your parting thoughts for people who are listening to us right now?
My parting thought is that mattering comes first, and human beings come first, always. And it has to be that way. And eventually it will have to be that way for everybody, because again, you cannot have a healthy team, a healthy life, a healthy organization, a healthy economy without healthy human beings.
Mattering. And how do we cultivate this mattering for ourselves, if not for the world?
Yeah, for other people around you, make sure you're noticing people, asking about their lives. Don't ask, how are you? Ask, what is your attention today? What are you struggling with today? How can I help you? Affirm people, show them the difference that they make. You know, the janitor who's cleaning the public bathroom, look at them in the eyes and say, hey, thank you for
Oh,
being
yeah.
part of my day,
Yeah.
and show people how they're needed. You know, today, just say to someone, if it wasn't for you, and tell them that they're relied on, and do those things every day.
In all the 5 corporate offices that I was, the only people who cared for me the most were the cleaning department
Oh, wow.
of those offices.
Wow.
Really, it's not like I treated them any differently. I treated everybody the same way. You know how there's a famous saying in the West that treat everybody from
Yeah,
CEO
right,
to the
right,
janitor the
right.
same way. It's so easy to put it off, but it's so difficult really to do that. I've done that, and I know the only people who genuinely cared for me were those guys, and they're so
Yeah,
amazing. And
yeah,
we, all of us, need to treat them with some dignity and respect, because, like you rightly mentioned, those are the people. If 60% of US is doing all those
yep,
frontline
yep,
professional services job, it really matters, and we need to give
yeah,
them that meaning to their job. And you also reminded me again of one thing where, you know, it's probably a cultural difference where, and it's also an Indian thing now, where we say, how are you, and something like that, but we never wait for the reply.
right,
We don't
right,
care.
right,
So I made this pact with my manager where I'm like, if you genuinely want to understand how I am, only then you ask me this question.
right.
It worked beautifully
And
for both of us.
you know, like, think about, if your supervisor, if I were to ask anybody, hey, if your supervisor called you out of the blue, what would your initial reaction be? Most people would say fear. And that's a problem, right? That something's wrong.
Unhealthy. There's something unhealthy with
Right. There's something unhealthy, because your supervisor should be checking in regularly and letting you know what's going right, not just contacting you when something's wrong. We shouldn't feel fearful or anxious around any human relationship. It's not a good relationship, but we accept it from supervisors all the time.
Absolutely. And like I said, this doesn't feel like an ending conversation. This feels like a never ending conversation. But as all good things have to stop, and I just have a humble request with you, Zach.
Sure.
In case people love this conversation and would want to hear more from you, can we get again on a podcast?
Yes, of course. I would love to. There's so much to dig into.
There is. There is. I feel like this has been an open-ended conversation, and I absolutely appreciate you giving me your time. I know what a busy man you are. I know how messed up the schedule was, but I'm so happy. I'm so happy that we did this.
Of course. Yeah, this was it was a great way to start my day, because it's the morning here. So it was
And
great.
it's a great way to end my day. So I think we both are going happy into this day.
It's great. So thank you. And please send me the recording and everything so I can
I'll
share.
do that. I'll do that.
Okay,
This is your story. Let's share. Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Bye.